Hi, I'm Mark, and in this video I'm going to show you how the Kickerbot web application that uses pokerbots to help you improve your poker game works. Specifically, it's Texas Hold'em poker. So, the quickest way to do that is to dive straight in. You go to kickerbot.azurewebsites.net, that's the URL, and if you hit start, you'll see straight away it's come up with the table. There are 6 positions on the table. All the positions are just randomly assigned at the start of the hand. We can see in this case I'm in the small blind. And we can see the tendencies of some of these other players. So the big blind's loose, the low jack's very tight, the high jack's very loose, cutoffs have got a neutral tendency profile, and the button is tight. Now, just before I continue, this software is intended for pretty much anyone who plays poker. So if you are very new, you've maybe only been playing for a short while, but you're playing online, cash games, six-handed, then this tool is ideal for you because it emulates those sorts of games. It is designed, the bots are designed to emulate the kinds of players that you come across when you're playing online, sort of micro stakes, low stakes, those kind of levels like 1 cent, 2 cent, 2 cent, 5 cent, 5 cent, 10 cent, those sorts of levels. Sometimes some of the players play like they're a little bit more advanced than that as well, but generally you should find that they do play like those sorts of players. But if you're a more experienced player, there's some other features here that could be very useful and help you improve your game as well. So in this case, we can see that I've got 5-2 offsuit, which is a rubbish hand, so I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to hit fold, and then I'm going to hit new hand, and I'm just going to keep doing this until I come across a hand that I would either open with or call with. Okay, so it's folded around to me on the button, and I've got pocket fours, so I open. Okay, my opponent has called, and the flop has come 8-5 king of all different suits, rainbow. Now, it's worth just mentioning that pre-flop, you can open for 3 big blinds, and that's a forced bet size. You can't choose your bet size pre-flop. And if your opponent re-raises you or you want to re-raise your opponent, it's always just a bit less than a pot-sized bet, which is a formula that is used in poker to determine bet size. You can look it up if you want to see what the exact formula is, but generally it's roughly a bit less than 3 times your opponent's bet. Once you get to the flop and beyond, you have more flexibility about your bet sizing, as we can see here from this little slider bar and the fact that we've got a number of big blinds. Now, the big blind has checked to me as the pre-flop aggressor. I've got pocket fours, so I'm going to hit bet. Okay, my opponent has folded. Once a player has folded, you can have a look. Once you're post-flop, by the way, you can have a look at what cards they had. So here we can see this player, very loose in the big blind, called speculative with 10-3 suited, didn't want to carry on. That's fair enough. I'm just going to see if I can find another hand. Okay, so it's folded around to me in the cutoff with ace-4 suited, so I'm going to open with this hand. And you can see the flops come jack, 4, 9 with 2 spades. And the small blind who called me pre-flop has now jumped in and bet against the run of play here. So this is a donk bet, as it's called, that the small blind has made into me here. So I've got bottom pair here. So I'm going to hit call. Let's just see what happens. Okay. So the turns come the 2 of clubs and the small blind's now checked. Now I'm going to show you something else you can do here. This is something for maybe slightly more experienced players who might be more interested in this. So you can click on your opponent and you can see the sorts of hands that they would have made that move with. So the small blind has checked the turn. So we can see here that they've got an unmade hand 56% of the time. They've got a pair, just a standard pair, 2% of the time. They've got top pair 36% of the time, and they've got an over pair 3% of the time. They've got 2 pair 1% of the time, and they've got a set 3 of a kind 1%. But also they've got all kinds of draws, which you would expect on a board like this, where there's a jack and a 9 and there's 2 spades. They've got no draw 45% of the time, but they've got a gut shot, like an inside straight draw 19% of the time. They've got an open-ended straight draw 18% of the time. They're flushing 4% of the time, so they would have 2 spades that didn't include the ace of spades, because nut flushing is a separate category here. You can see 6% of the time they're nut flushing. That would on this board would be ace-x of spades. They've got a gut shot combo 4% of the time, so that would be where they've got an inside straight draw or a gut shot, and also 2 spades. And they've got an open-ended combo 3% of the time, so that will be where they've got an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw, an immediate flush draw. So okay, so that gives us quite a lot of information about what our opponent would have made that move with. And like I say, for more experienced players, that might be quite useful. And for less experienced players, it may well be interesting to look at this and start to get a feel for how more experienced players tend to think about the game, because they do tend to think about what kinds of hands has my opponent got at this point. And this is telling us specifically in pie charts and donut charts exactly what made hand types and what immediate straight or flush draws our opponent has, and also how often they would check and how often they would bet in this spot. So it gives you quite a lot of useful information. So the small blind is checked. I'm going to check as well. We get to the river comes the 8 of clubs, and the small blind is now bet for 6.4. It's a fairly low bet. There was about 14 in the pot before, and he's bet 6.4. Let's have a look what they would do this with. So we can see now, suddenly, a lot of our opponents' draws have got there, and they would be betting 67% of the time here, but they've actually got a made straight 37% of the time. And basically all we've got here is what was bottom pair on the flop. It's 4th pair now. I mean, we're not good often enough to make this call. So I am now going to fold. And we can have a peek at what they had. And there we go. So they had 7-8. So in the end, they only had 3rd pair. But obviously the bot must have judged that that was a value bet there. Maybe he thought he would get a call from a 4 or from pocket 5s or pocket 6s, because the hand had been played fairly passively up until then. Another feature that the software has is the ability for us to go back. So we can hit undo. We can go back in this hand. We can go back to a previous decision. But obviously at this point, I now know exactly what my opponent had. It's actually a very strong hand on this flop, isn't it? Because they had 2 spades and a gut shot. So if we just go back and have a look at their range, we can see that they actually had they were in the gut shot combo area, which didn't get there in the end, although it did improve to a pair eventually on the river. And they now bet for 3.8. We can take a different decision here if we want. We could try and raise them. So let's make quite a big raise. Let's see what they do. Okay, and on this occasion they folded. They decided to fold the pretty strong draw. This is quite a tight player. If we go back and maybe re-raise to a lower amount, somewhere around there, we can see on the with that bet size they've now decided to call. So this just gives you an idea of the kinds of things you can do with this tool. You're playing against bots. You can go back in the hand. By the way, you can only go back in the current hand. Once you start a new hand, you can only wind back to the start of the hand you're playing. And obviously have a look at the cards that your opponent had once you're post-flop, when the hand ends. And you can have a look at sort of statistical information, data about the types of both made hands and draws that the opponent has, and also how often they would bet and check in different spots. And the more you use this, the idea is that you just become more and more experienced at how to play against players of this sort of type. Like I said, we are trying to emulate the sorts of players that you come across playing micro stakes and low stakes online. So if you have any feedback about Kickerbot, please let us know at support@kickersoftware.com. And I hope that you enjoy using it. Thanks for watching.